Okay, so as we need to keep moving forward with the agenda, Alberto,
exactly.
would you like to introduce our next moderator and panelists?
Exactly. First, our next moderator is Hubert Tardieu, the Gaia-X independent board member, and he is going to invite on a stage brilliant speakers to talk about the implementation of the Data Governance and the Data Act and the challenges ahead.
I would like to call on the stage Jakob Rehof, Martine Gouriet, and Bert Verdonck. So, just to present them, Martine is a director of digital use in EDF. Jakob is a professor of computer science in TU Dortmund, and Bert is a CEO of Luxembourg Data National Service. So you may remember that during the Gaia-X summit in November 22, we organized a panel about automated compliance in the context of European data strategy regulations. Since then, Data Governance Act has been entered into force in September 23, and the Data Act has been agreed last June, and yesterday the European Parliament has also agreed on it. We use the opportunity of a conference organized jointly by Université Paris-Dauphine and the Gaia-X Institute to work further on this topic, and we would like, with my colleague here, to bring you back the findings of that conference. The question is not anymore which regulation do we need, but rather how to implement what has been agreed in the sharing of non-personal data. As always, the question of which sequence is best can be raised, either launching data space first and regulating them when we understand its business mechanism, we were discussing that 2 minutes ago, or regulating first and tuning the regulation based upon the first experience of data space. Europe, as you know, has opted for the latter, and we all together need to get organized for promoting data spaces and in the meantime implementing the regulation with the necessary adjustment. Today, I'm sure we shall be speaking extensively about data intermediary. The objective of the European data strategy cannot be met without data intermediaries, but we have learned in the B2C market that there are inherent dangers that they are carrying, and the DGA and DA are there to somehow to tame those dangers we have learned in the B2C market. And I would like in this panel to give you a first picture of this landscape, and in order to better understand the context, the Gaia-X Institute has commissioned a survey conducted by the Chair, Governance and Regulation of Paris-Dauphine of the 10 Lighthouse projects of Gaia-X to get their feedback about the new regulation. The main finding will be now presented by Bert. So Bert, can you give us a feedback of this study?
Thank you, Hubert, and good morning. So indeed, over the summer period, we were able to have a number of structured interviews with the Lighthouse initiatives to have a conversation about where they go, how they look at all these new regulations, the changing, the evolving regulatory landscape. And it will not surprise you that a lot of these changes are going on and are not necessarily easy for these initiatives to interpret. So what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my use case, for my organizational setup, for the governance of my data space? So that's why we ran this series of interviews with a structured questionnaire. And we have analyzed the feedback, and the feedback, of course, was very, with a lot of variation, because all of the initiatives are at a different stage in their development cycle. Of course, some have started already years ago, some are still in the shaping stage, so of course there is a lot of variation. But the compliance with this regulation is a concern of all of them. We have structured the interview in three main dimensions. We have looked at the business context of the initiative. We have looked at the regulatory context, the legal basis for the data sharing in these data spaces. And we've looked at the technology choices that they have made or that they are in the process of making. So let me start with the regulatory context first and some observations. So all of these acts come with obligations for the participants of a data space, for the data providers or the data owners, as well as for the data users. But also there are new roles in a data space context, like a governance authority or an intermediary. And some of these data space coordination roles are also subject to regulation. So the compliance is not only for the direct participants, but there are also rules coming forward now for the other actors in a data space. And when you when you organize a data space, you need to take all of those into account, and you need to manage that compliance. So in general, the feedback of the people we interviewed on the regulations is a little bit mixed. Of course, there are advantages and opportunities in implementing the regulatory framework. It gives some stability. But on the other hand, there's a lot of concerns of how are we going to practically do that, right? It becomes a day-to-day activity and business to stay compliant with a fastly evolving landscape, regulatory landscape. Second, we looked into the business context, and there the main observation is there is not one single general business model for a data space. It all depends on the use cases. And there are several learnings, and of course the business viability typically improves when there are more use cases at stake, use cases that address a larger audience, more participation, a use case that drives adoption, because data spaces need scale, let's be honest. And the business value comes typically from subscriptions, could come from direct subscriptions to a certain service. They also come from the value-added services that can be built around the data space, around the applications of the data space. So there is a lot of variation in these business models. And another observation is that also there is a learning effect. A data space may start up with an initial use case, and from there advance in variations, in additional service offering, additional use cases. And that is how that business viability evolves. Then looking at technology, their main feedback is that there is also not one single solution for all these data spaces. There is a variation also, and technology will need to adjust and solve the specific challenges of all these use cases. And also the different types of participants. It's a different context in a B2B with established IT landscape than in business to consumer types of applications. The technology should lower the barrier of entry and the scalability of the initiatives. Then last but not least, the data intermediation services are a new given as defined in the Data Governance Act, and as we've seen some parties take these roles in the past, there's good and bad about these data intermediation services. For sure, they need to have a certain neutrality, non-competitive practices, they need to avoid lock-in effects, and we see that they are now very ex-ante regulated. The DGA has put a baseline in place, an intermediation service should do this and that. But the opinions are, again, different here. So some people see them as a good step forward, but there is again a lot of fear for, will these intermediation service providers have a viable business model, and will they be stable? And we need them to be stable over a long run, because also an intermediation service needs to achieve scale to be efficient. So also there's a lot of doubt still about how can we make these intermediation services viable on the long run. Brings me to my conclusion, overall conclusion. So I think there were three. The business cases are very relevant and are driven by use cases. The value of the intermediation services depends again a lot of the context, the sector, the type of participants, and the scale of these initiatives in order to make them economically viable. And the technology solutions really still need to mature and evolve a lot to make them suitable for each of the different use cases, different types of stakeholders, and the type of exchange. And I think you saw that yesterday from all the Lighthouse presentations. You see this variation out there. There is not one magical technology component that drives them all. There are a number of shared components, but there's a lot of tailoring also needing to take place. But that is the richness of this new data space ecosystem landscape. So those were the main observations from this interview round.
Thank you, Bert. So the result of this investigation have been presented to the responsible of the main Lighthouse project that you have seen yesterday, either those which are live, like Gaia-X with Oliver Gunzer, Ag Data Hub with Sébastien Picarda, they were all physically there, or the other Lighthouse project like Gaia-X in preparation, or the one in creation like energy and aerospace. And the objective was to get their reaction on the investigation done under the auspices of Bert, and to understand how they see the DGA and DA in the development of their data space. So Martine, you have been the one moderating this panel. What are the main outcomes?
So, very good, yes. Thank you, Bert, and thank you all. So let me tell you that it is the third time I go to this summit, and it's really a pleasure, because 3 years ago it was just something on the paper, and now we have seen yesterday that it's not anymore paper, but we have some reality and some code. So it's really a pleasure to be there and to see the work that is becoming a reality. So coming back to the round table I had the pleasure to animate. So I have roughly the main conclusions, as you said, Bert. So 3 main takeaways. So the first point, with all these players, the first point is that digital sovereignty is the key for the future of Europe. So no food sovereignty, no energy sovereignty, no manufacturing sovereignty without data sovereignty. But what does that mean exactly? Because everybody speaks about sovereignty, but what does that mean exactly, data sovereignty? So 2 points. First, to be able to take control of your data, knowing who is using them, on which contract, on which use, how they are shared. So that's the first point, and this is key for the data sovereignty. Second point is to be able to share them on a trusted, secured, and sovereign way. High level of cyber security, portability, transparency, immunity to non-European laws, especially for the most sensitive data. So on that point of digital sovereignty, we think that the Gaia-X framework, with its basic conformity, its 63 rules, its 3 levels of labels, are a good and balanced answer. Different levels of conformity and labels depending on the sensitivity of your data. So that was the first point, digital sovereignty, key for the future of Europe. Second point is data space are now a reality, so everybody speaks about that with a lot of use cases, and we spoke of that with a lot of business value. But the point is really that it's not only something related to data, you have also to bring around the layer of data, you have to bring also a lot of governance, a lot of legal framework, you have to bring that together, and it's not so easy. And as we said, it's not so easy to put figures and to put something related to the business value. So we have still to say what are the business cases and to detail the business cases, because it's not already something which is very, very clear. The third point, and we said already that regulation has still to be understood and implemented. We spoke a lot about data intermediaries. It is a discussed point. Some of the sectors said it is really necessary. Some of them do not see the value of data intermediaries, so it depends. It depends from the different sectors. And we'll see what the future will be on that point. But there was also a lot of discussion related to regulation. Regulation is really seen as necessary, but everybody says that now we know what we don't want. That's clear, and regulation is there to know what we don't want. But the point is to build upon what we want. And this is really a key point. We need to build upon what we want. We need to do investment, and we have to build with cooperation. And I think that what we see today and yesterday also is really about cooperation and investment all together. So 3 points. Digital sovereignty, data spaces, and regulation. And to come to a conclusion, and this is a personal conclusion, not a conclusion of the round table, to tell you that really I'm quite enthusiastic about the results of Gaia-X 3 years after. Because now we have the framework, we have also the network, and we see that things are going up and running. But we need to expand, we need to have more research, and I will give the floor to Jakob, who will explain to you what are the research. But now we have results, and I think we need to be, and we are optimistic about the future.
Thank you, Martine. So, automated compliance is an essential way to establish trust between the participant to a data space. Everyone since yesterday has repeated that. European Commission, and it was specifically Ivo Volman, who has been instrumental in writing the new regulation, is very keen to see what is called compliance as code can be used for implementing regulation. As well, the Data Act is promoting specifically and explicitly smart contract. Jakob, can you tell us where we stand on this topic at this moment?
Yes, thank you, Hubert. So first of all, maybe just to put the context of compliance automation, it's really about lowering the barrier to entry into regulated data spaces by trying to raise the level of automation in achieving compliance and in checking compliance with regulation. So that's the connection to the business aspect of this whole area here, which is of major importance to Gaia-X. So it's really about lowering the cost of getting on board in a regulated space. So that's, as a goal, is pretty clear, but getting there is not so easy. And so that's why we want to use the Gaia-X Institute to help think ahead on this and to help contribute with some insights that it might be difficult to obtain when you're sort of in the daily battle of getting things running. So first of all, you need to be able to interface between technology and law, essentially. Now, that interface is complicated in and of itself. And so that's one area where we want to try to contribute. The other is the interface between technology and governance. So you can't have compliance technology without having suitable governance instruments in place. And so Pierre Gouriet and his team in Gaia-X is thinking a lot about that, and is doing some great work there, and so we're trying to help out on that aspect too. Now, computer science has been quite obsessed actually with code correctness and code compliance since the beginning of computer science, but it's a hard problem. And so it's been a long quest, but there's progress being made, and so I want to help tap into a lot of the great insights that computer science has produced over the years in that context. One thing though is clear is that you can't just take a computer system, right, and some rules, say for compliance, and then leave it to an algorithm to check whether those rules obtain and are satisfied by the code. We know from computer science that this is impossible. It's mathematically impossible. So what we have to do is that we have to work with a kind of a mix of smart computer science on the one hand, and then design on the other hand. You have to design your systems in such a way that it becomes possible to automatically check whether compliance holds or not. And that's what I call automated compliance by design. So it's a mix of algorithm, of being smart about algorithms and being smart about designing your system for automation of compliance. And so one really key example of how that can work is smart contracts. And it's also a good example of what I mean by compliance by design, even from the perspective of the regulator. So it'd be nice if the regulator were able to put out regulations that we could actually check automatically, right? So that would be great. Now that's not always possible, but smart contracts is a really good example of one area where this can actually really be brought forward. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's so great that in the Data Act, Article 30, the regulator has actually tried to do something on that context of smart contracts. So there's a big part of the Data Act actually talks about smart contracts. And smart contracts is from a technological and scientific standpoint, a very important place where you can sort of hook compliance technology in. It gives you kind of an identifiable area of the system where we can do things like automatic checking. We can take advantage of data spaces, sharing resources. You can imagine developing test beds, verification tools for smart contracts. And so it's been really a great thing to see that plays such a big role in the Data Act. I also want to take the opportunity here to mention that I think that there's really pioneering work that Europe can drive in this area. We've got some really great science in this area, but it's been harder to get that science mobilized for the kinds of purposes and practice that we want to drive here. And so this is also one place where I see a role for the Gaia-X Institute helping as we go forward to tap into those great resources that we really have. I also want to mention here the great work that's going on, for example, at the hyperscaler labs in the US. I know pretty well, I was there 10 years myself. And so I also want to reach out there and see if we can take advantage of some of that great work. My last point would be to emphasize the importance of AI. I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody here about what the background there is, but it also needs to really enter into the work on automated compliance. And I think some of the concepts that we're developing on data compliance can also be used in the context of compliance for AI systems, which, as we know, is coming up in the AI Act at a regulatory basis as well. So going forward, this is going to be something the Gaia-X Institute wants to help think about as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. So, since you have the microphone and you are the animator of the Gaia-X Institute, can you tell us what will be the next step in 2024?
Yes, I think I'm going to need my slides for that. I prepared a slide to just summarize what our thoughts are on the 2024 program as we go forward. While we're waiting for that, I can tell you already that maybe you can bring it ahead, Hubert. Yes, thank you. that's a pretty dense slide, so I'll just try to summarize what's going on out there. Just going back to the conference that we had that Hubert was mentioning, I want to emphasize what's at the end of the slide here is that we put out a very comprehensive video material from that conference, and I really want to urge you to go and click down those links. There are no less than 4 YouTube videos there, and so you can really get advantage of what that program has to offer. We had at the beginning some very high quality statements from Jean-Noël Barrot and Franziska Brandner. It was really nice to see from the political end some extremely high quality, well prepared statements there. We had from Ivo Wollmann a statement that you can find in the second video, which I really want to recommend to you. Ivo is leading the data directorate in the EU Commission. It's a fantastic opportunity to try to put yourself into the mind of the regulator. And I also want to mention here how Ivo stresses the importance of the data space initiatives. He really sees that as a key way of implementing the regulatory work that they're putting out. Also, quite significantly, Ivo issues in his statement a very, I think, serious invitation for everyone who has a need for further information or questions to get into contact with his office. Now, that's a statement he would not have had to make. I mean, nobody forced him to make that statement. He made it and he meant it. And I was very impressed with that. So I urge you to take a look at that. That's video 2. Now, Martine already actually nicely summarized some of the key takeaways here concerning convergence of views. So I'm not going to repeat that. I do want to maybe emphasize also the topic that also has to do with what Bert was saying, namely that there's a difference in topics depending on the market structure. So, for example, we had a nice demonstration from the agriculture data space work vis-a-vis, say, Gaia-X, showing how from the market structure there are very different perspectives on the work in data spaces and the regulation. For example, the role of the intermediary cannot be the same in these two contexts. And so we need to understand that sort of stuff. And this is one of the reasons why we are going to put on the 2024 program, we are going to put the topic of economy of data sharing at a key position going forward in collaboration with Paris Dauphine. We are going to arrange for another conference in probably September 2024, which will deal with the economy of data sharing on the one hand and also deal with the technological governance going along with that, because in the context of regulated markets, regulated data sharing, you can't think about business models and economical topics without also thinking about governance topics. And so we're going to bring those two topics together and really put a focus on that for our 2024 program. And so we're going to move on as well, with further work on automated compliance by design. I'm going to reach out to stakeholders. I'm going to keep reaching out to Pierre Gouriet and his team. And I also want to take this opportunity to reach out to you and say that if you have topics, if you have things on your minds, feel free to contact us. But we will be reaching out from the Gaia-X Institute more and more as we move along, also to bring in further partners from research and development organizations as we move on. So I'm really looking forward to continuing into 2024 with the program of the Gaia-X Institute. We're here to help you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. So I think we can applaud everyone for that. Alberto, back to you.
Thank you for this great discussion on two very important pieces of legislation, because we just not need to see this Data Governance Act and Data Act as an obligation, but also an opportunity to make more business, to get data to be reused by other people. So think always openly to this type of legislation.
Okay, so now we go to one of the favorite parts of the morning, coffee break. After the coffee break, we will keep talking about legislation in Europe. We expect you back here at 11, please. 11. Just remind that today there are no guided tours, so you're free to move along, network, visit the booths, but there are no guided tours. So we expect you back here at
11.